So, see, Elon Musk, of course, comes from a very philosophical background. Clearly, it's not a commercial decision, right? So, his perspective was that this is a town square of the world. It should run in a certain way. He's approaching the problem more to kind of create a platform which he believes in, which should be like the voice of the world. And again, he has talked about making it like a single big app which does everything. We don't know how that's going to evolve, but I think the intent that he has is not technology. The intent is essentially to run the discourse in the world in a certain way. But it is also it's a bit of a question mark. I don't see that as a resolved problem as of now. That okay, Elon Musk's takeover will make the platform significantly different, at least in the Indian context, because ultimately the question here is that would a platform follow the law of the land or not? And I think that's probably the more overarching question. So that remains to be seen. We will know in the next, let's say, 6-8 months.
Namaste and welcome to the Bharat Varta podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa. If this is your first time here, we publish episodes on politics, policy, and culture focused on India every week. Do follow us or subscribe to us to stay updated on all of the latest content. If you are a returning visitor, then consider rating and reviewing us on your favorite platform so more people can discover our content. Twitter has been in the news a lot lately with Elon Musk's takeover and the ensuing drama of the Twitter files and revelations and so on. And to discuss this, I called on old friends of the podcast, Aashish Chadorkar and Amit Paranjape, who you've heard on multiple podcasts before speaking about topical issues around policy and tech. This was a fun chat around everything that is happening with Twitter. I hope you like it. Hey Ashish, hey Amit, great to have you guys back on the podcast. It's always nice to have old friends of the podcast on air again. So, how are you guys being?
Doing good, and thanks for inviting me after a long time.
Thanks, Carrie. It's great to be back. It's a cold day in Geneva when we record. It's snowing in the first snow of the year. Hopefully, the Twitter winter will not be as cold.
So this is an interesting discussion, right? And something that I've wanted to talk for quite a while. In fact, I think the three of us met on Twitter, and it's awesome that we get to talk about Twitter, right? So I often wonder, right? I mean, is Twitter as significant to someone else as it is for me, right? Or for the three of us, right? And Ashish, if you look at it, we're a nation of 1.4 billion people. Twitter has something like 250-300 million users worldwide. 10 or 12% of that from India, right? How much of all of this Twitter discourse or even talking about Twitter really affects India?
So it's not so much about the volume, Carrie, or as to rather who uses Twitter, right? And that kind of drives the platform's impact. Twitter is not in the game of, it's far behind in the game of daily users, monthly users. In fact, I was looking at a statistic from on Statista a few weeks back, and Twitter was only the 15th largest platform in terms of the number of users. I think it had 400 million plus kind of user accounts. And of course, we know that not all of them are active. Then there are, of course, brand accounts, and people may have different accounts and so on. So, of course, the number of people, individuals who are operating Twitter could be fairly small, even worldwide. Of course, in India, it's very small. Probably talk about 25 million accounts. So, roughly, you can say 15, 16 million total individuals involved in it, right? And the active ones could be even smaller. So it's not so much as to the numbers, but it's about who is on Twitter. If you see the early trends, at least in India, the first adoption was by actually the media. Some politicians joined, sports people were involved, and then there were people like us who were relatively early adopters of the technology. We thought we had something to say, so we logged on, and then we stayed. I had written an article, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where I had said that see, Twitter has a very unique feature of a two-sided platform. Practically, I mean, all technology platforms are two-sided. You are trying to bring together a set of consumers of content and producer of content. Now, in this case, if you look at other platforms, say Facebook, for example. So Facebook was all few people creating content and a lot of people just liking it for the sake of social, courtesy that someone in your family has posted something, you just like it or occasionally comment on it. If you look at Instagram, it was always driven as a celebrity platform. It's only now that it has kind of started getting more democratized via reels and so on. But largely, it started like a celebrity platform for celebrity broadcasts. So everyone talks to, I mean, all celebrities talk to each other and you watch them, right? So it becomes a peek into the personal kind of side of the celebrities, but still it is not very participative in nature. Twitter was a very unique situation where anyone could talk to anyone, and the same person could also play the role of both creator of content and consumer of content. So, for example, like let's say Amit was talking about history of Pune. I can still only be reading about history of Pune, but I can be talking about cricket, which could be my other interest area, right? So, since I don't know enough about history of Pune, I read, but I think I know enough about cricket, so I write. And this unique combination that the two-sided platform, I mean, all technology platforms want to become a successful two-sided kind of a market. Twitter had this built in. This was native to Twitter right from day one, and I think this is what differentiated them in terms of the adoption. That the fact that you can talk to people who have really great ideas about some specific topic, right? I think was a very unique feature of Twitter. So in my view, the question about volumes is not what is driving the network effect of Twitter. The network effect of Twitter is driven by what is being talked about and who's there. I think that is completely irreplaceable in some ways, because to take the same set of people to another platform and to replicate the same kind of interactions, so far, I mean, of course, it even has found it very difficult, and which is why Twitter thrives and survives.
Yeah, adding to that, right? I think Twitter is the first social platform where people kind of congregated around content, right? I mean, earlier, before that, I think it was relationships, right? And the other thing is the whole journalistic value of Twitter, right? I mean, I think Twitter killed breaking news, right? I think things first appear on Twitter and are carried elsewhere, right? And the
Right,
fact that,
Carrie. I think there's one example I always like to highlight since you mentioned, the breaking news, and I always talk about it when I talk about Twitter. I think the inflection point for Twitter happened in 2009 when the U.S. Airways flight had to do an emergency landing in the Hudson, right? And of course, a very famous movie starring Tom Hanks, Sully, was made on that incident. Now, that is one single incident where there was a Twitter user on the bank of the Hudson who actually started tweeting about it. That time you couldn't upload a photo in Twitter, but you could post a link which had a photo on it. And he started talking about it. And the media, I mean, this is New York, so the headquarters of most media. But even then, media took 15 to 30 minutes to get to that news. So for 15 to 30 minutes, here was a nobody, a Twitter user, who had better access to one of the most important breaking news of that year and was feeding updates. That's when all the smart journalists and media and other influencers woke up to the power of Twitter. They realized how an individual can broadcast any important information. Could be breaking news, could be some other. Even politicians really found out the power of that. And I think that was a very important incident that changed Twitter. I think from being a small tech experiment where a lot of techies and early adopters like me and Ashish and others were using it, to journalists jumping onto it in a big way.
yeah.
I mean, that
So this is how,
reminds me of the May 2011 tweet when someone heard funny noises over Abbottabad on a early morning of May
yeah,
2nd, 2011,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That was the other one.
That was the other one, yeah. I mean, yeah, I remember the Abbottabad one as much, right? I mean, yeah, that was amazing. In some sense, to see it kind of play out real time, right? And you're sharing this moment with people across countries. That was something else. And to Amit's point as well, right? I think another facet of Twitter is the fact that all these influencers and really big celebrities, sports stars, actors, whatnot, really took to Twitter, right? Again, we can discuss, what the specific appeal of Twitter was that they found it viable as a platform, right? But yeah, I mean that almost one arm distance connection to someone like the Prime Minister of India or your favorite cricketer, right, is fantastic. Is just an amazing facet of Twitter, I think. But Amit, Twitter has not been without its problems, right? I mean, over the years we've seen, for example, the bots issue was highlighted by Elon, and we'll talk about that specifically. Then there's been the case of misinformation, and there've been a lot of debate about how the content moderation has been handled, and so on and so forth. In your mind, what are some of the key issues plaguing Twitter right now?
So I think let me briefly answer the previous question because that transitions into the answer for this question as well. See, originally some of the early adopters of Twitter were also the bloggers. And the blogging revolution had started probably about 20 years back, early part of the 2010 decade. And both the writers of blogs who were from all areas, right, whether they were individuals, whether they were celebrities, whether they were politicians, journalists, and the readers of the blog had the same issue. It took too much time to produce and too much time to consume. So this whole 140 character revolution was one of the disruptive features that Twitter introduced. And certainly people said, hey, I have time to write one or two lines. I have time to read one or two lines. So why don't I go with that? And that was also one of the big factors that created the disruption. Now that has also resulted in some of the issues that you're asking me about. I think in terms of the challenges or issues with Twitter over the last nearly 18 years, I think since they started 2005 or 6, I would put them into two categories. There is the technical category, the software infrastructure category, and then there is the actual management or moderation of content category. I think both these categories are different. So let me quickly talk about the technical aspects. From a technical standpoint, I think Twitter had one of the best ideas over the last 2 decades or of this millennium. I mean, it was really the first time I looked at the idea and I thought, here is another Google search. I mean, Facebook, something like Facebook had been created before in an Orkut or in a MySpace. And YouTube, yes, I mean, there were other sites. But this whole idea of shrinking this into such a small piece of 140 characters, later 280 characters, and making it, as Ashish mentioned earlier, on a bi-directional platform, not being a celebrity driven or one to many. From day one, it was a many to many platform. I think that was a brilliant idea. So from idea standpoint, I would say Twitter was probably way ahead of everyone else. Unfortunately, and as has been seen by all heavy Twitter users over the last so many years, they didn't have the best technical team. Like I think, like what both technical and management team, like what Google or Facebook were able to assemble.
Amit,
And as a result, they did have a
do you remember
bunch
the
of
fail whales?
yeah. So as a result, early on, I mean, some of them they resolved, but early on, there were large number of technical issues on Twitter compared to what some of the other platforms, and it really created a lot of frustration amongst loyal users like all of us. They did address some of this, but that legacy still continues, and that's something. I know you're going to talk about it later on, but that's something that Elon Musk, who is many things, but he is also a very smart technology architect himself, and he has seen these issues actively from the outside as a heavy user, and now it's his goal to fix that as well. So I think technologically, I think there are a lot of things that have plagued Twitter in terms of scalability, in terms of features like search, in terms of just stability of the platform, in terms of interfaces. So I think those are something that have been there over the years, and those are some things that I'm sure will be there on Musk's to do and to fix list. Now, the second part is obviously something that has been in the news very actively ever since Musk got involved in this. But even before, I mean, the whole content moderation, right? And while users think of a platform as something which is an equal opportunity or will give equal access or equal representation of content, we have now seen, and of course, with the Twitter files coming out over the past few days, including the release today, we know things were not like that. There were arbitrary policies for moderation of content which were affecting some set of people, but not equally affecting other set of people. That is a whole big topic of how what kind of an ideology was influencing a content moderation in Twitter. The bots was a completely separate issue, which was also not being handled. So I think there was a series of issues, whether it was technology, whether it was moderation, whether it was the ideology that was behind it, and who was controlling it, and things like who to ban. I mean, the whole Trump ban issue 2 years back was a big political discussion, and even now that issue is still out there. So I think series of these issues have plagued Twitter, and they haven't really been able to address many of these very well. Well, some of them were probably driven by the ideology, but some of them were just mismanagement. I mean, look at it, right? For example, Facebook and Google have had a CEO for 10 plus years, Facebook even longer. Twitter has had 5 CEOs in a short period of time, right, in the last 10 years. So I think that also indicates the whole stability issue of the leadership and management of the company.
Yeah. And Jack Dorsey being CEO of two companies, right? Square and Twitter simultaneously, right? So, yeah, I mean, funny thing is, Twitter was one of the first few large scale applications that used the Rails framework. And I remember we were migrating to Rails at that point of time, 2008, 2009. And anytime this fail
Right.
whale came up, I mean, there was this whole panic feeling in the office, right? Ki hamara kya hoga, right? At some point of time, and it's crazy. I mean, that's what we thought the problems would be restricted to. I mean, but the problems have grown kind of manifoldly, right? I mean, in fact, I think 2016 I wrote an article for Swaraja that the troubles are exaggerated and they really can turn it around. From a business perspective, I feel like Twitter didn't have a good handle on this from the early on. I think somehow, I mean, they were very niche.
I think that's a good point. I missed that. I think
Yeah.
even with such a brilliant idea, they were never
Yeah.
able to monetize it the way YouTube or Google search or
Exactly.
Facebook was able to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, so in that article, basically, I had told them that look, rather, I had made the case that there's just so many insights being generated, right? I mean, which is like a goldmine for brands and everything. That and even Twitter advertising really was very half-assed actually for a long time. And even now, I would argue that Twitter advertising, having used Twitter advertising as a brand and sponsor, I mean, it's really ancient, right? I mean, it's not that great. But Ashish, I mean, we have a new chapter in Twitter's history. Of course, Lord Elon has taken over Twitter. Right, for $44 billion. Talk about real skin in the game, and he wants to build the public square for humanity, right? And in that sense, he has staked a lot of his own personal brand and wealth at stake, right? So, what do you make of Twitter and Elon's takeover as such?
So, see, Elon Musk, of course, comes from a very philosophical background. Clearly, it's not a commercial decision, right? So, his perspective was that this is a town square of the world. It should run in a certain way. He's approaching the problem more to kind of create a platform which he believes in, which should be like the voice of the world. And again, he has talked about making it like a single big app which does everything. We don't know how that's going to evolve, but I think the intent that he has is not technology. The intent is essentially to run the discourse in the world in a certain way. There's of course also criticism that why should like a business baron have a control over media, but then that's not a unique problem. Look around us, and in every large country or in most large countries, media has very deep business linkages. I mean, in some cases, the media barons have become so big that they probably started as a media people, but they've become barons in their own right. Otherwise, also rich people control media in several countries. So that is hardly a like, let's say, a differentiated criticism for Twitter as such. It remains to be seen what his, like, when he says free speech. Free speech is also, I mean, as an idea, it's fine to say that something should be free speech, but the fact is that each country has got its own laws and regulations, and the definition of free speech actually varies by the law of the land, right? So, but if you go from one country to another, the same sentence or the same expression may not be acceptable. Of course, right now his focus is completely on the US side of the problem, so it's fine. But when things kind of become more normal and he has achieved a certain kind of a stable status of running the company, the questions will be asked as to what else is Twitter doing in other places, right? And not just in India, but in general, I'm saying that other countries will also get interested in similar questions. What are the US politicians or US media industries interested in asking Elon? So that's going to come, and then what will happen is that in the interpretations of say a US or a EU. I mean, EU has already told Elon apparently that he needs to have better content moderation, right? I mean, there was a news last week that he was told very clearly by EU on their perspective of what is content moderation. So as things evolve for him, we will know the answer. Of course, as I said, his intent is nothing to do with technology per se, but he can of course bring in his technology expertise to solve some of those problems. But it is also it's a bit of a question mark. I don't see that as a resolved problem as of now. That okay, Elon Musk's takeover will make the platform significantly different, at least in the Indian context, because ultimately the question here is that would a platform follow the law of the land or not? And I think that's probably the more overarching question. So that remains to be seen. We will know in the next, let's say, 6-8 months.
Yeah, and he paid premium for this, right? I mean, $44 billion. This was before the whole market correction and everything. Arguably, I think you can say that he could have bought it for a fraction of that if he had waited a little longer. So it was certainly like a passion-driven decision, right? And there was this other facet on, hey, is it easier to just build a Twitter than rather buy this platform for what it's worth, right? And again, in these discussions, people kind of underestimate the network effects and how much time and effort it takes to scale, move people as well, right? And it's not like there haven't been efforts before. There's Truth Social, of course, championed by the former US President Donald Trump as well, but really nothing has come out of that. Amit, what do you make of Elon's vision, right? I mean, he says, I'm going to create a free speech platform, right? So is that even plausible? I mean, do you think that something like that can exist?
I think I agree with what Ashish just said. I think free speech as an idea obviously is a great idea and has been a foundation for many countries and many democracies. But in reality, even in the most free democracies around the world, there are some restrictions, and each country has its own set of laws that govern free speech in terms of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So I think Twitter will eventually have to comply with those. And I think he hasn't made a strong statement on that, but just going by what he has done with his previous companies or his other companies, like whether it's Tesla. Tesla had a lot of rules requirement in Europe and China. He has adjusted to those. Same with Starlink when it comes to his global internet. So I think while he is obviously going to push for free speech, I think he will be realistic. Again, that's what I'm hoping to comply with the various rules of the land, at least as far as major markets are concerned. And clearly, after US, Europe, and India are amongst his biggest markets. So that's the hope. Of course, the other expectation is, and this is something that again we will come to, is it is definitely more balanced and not biased towards one side of ideology. It's not ideology driven; it is basic rules driven in terms of whatever is the lay of the land is, in terms of what needs to be moderated and what should not be moderated. And those decisions are based more on an open framework and an open set of rules that are transparent. I mean, this whole discussion that started since this morning, since this shadow banning issue had come up, right? One of the good things that he has said publicly in a tweet this morning itself is he wants to make those criteria very transparent. And so those kind of things are good when there are going to be all kinds of rules. There are going to be moderation rules. There are going to be filtering rules. There are going to be potentially even banning of account rules and all that. As long as those rules are very clearly known and published and transparent and applied equally to all involved, I think that is obviously a much better thing than what we have seen in the past as far as Twitter is concerned. But again, remains to be seen how we approaches this and how we prioritizes these issues.
Yeah, I think a couple of things, right? One, he had mentioned free speech is not the same as free reach, right? And he had said that, obviously negative or abusive or harmful tweets will not get the same mileage as the average tweet that someone puts out. And also, I think he had mentioned that, Twitter will abide by some of these government regulations and so on, like every other corporation has to, right? I mean, you can't function as a sort of a supranational entity in that sense.
So, can you just to add there? I think that what you said in the last is actually the crux of the argument, right? See, one challenge is, okay, we can debate what is free speech and how it's defined and the differences. But what was clearly happening so far was that it was not the Twitter's algorithms, but it was the Twitter's human beings which were making that decision in terms of what they thought was free speech, right? So I think even neutral algorithms should be fine for people if as long as they're able to establish that the algorithms were truly neutral, right? But I mean, they can demonstrate that. Even that could be accepted. But the challenge which Twitter is facing was that there is a legacy of what they said versus what they did. So when they said that they were being quote unquote neutral, I mean clearly that wasn't the case because it doesn't matter which side of the opinion divide you are. The point is when a human being will make a decision, there will be a bias associated with the decision, right? So I think that is where I think the challenge lies. The definition and the debate aside, as long as he's able to create a framework which is where the bias is known. I wouldn't say that it's unbiased, but I would say whether things are on record. I think that could probably change a little bit on the perception side for the platform.
No, I always found it weird that for a technology company, why they had so many of these policy folks, right? And we're not talking about an 8 or 10 member team. I mean, this is literally safety, security, integrity policy teams, which are like hundreds of people, right? And yeah, I mean, you could say that, some of these decisions were last mile, but, what the Twitter files have revealed, it's not really the last mile as such, right? I mean, these arbitrary decisions were not happening at the last mile. I mean, it was literally an email exchange, right?
Yeah.
That hey, so and so is doing this thing, and what can we do about it types. So Ashish, but it's easier to say than done, right? I mean, content moderation as such, I'm not sure who has even got it right. And clearly at this point of time, the platforms have moved far beyond pipes and infrastructure to actually acting like publishers, right? So in your view, how would you advise something like Twitter on content moderation?
See, the question of the publisher versus platform is a real question to tackle. What we have seen in the last few days coming out of the Twitter files, those threads, plus the information which Musk has put out, is that clearly there were content decisions being made very consciously by the platform. So when a platform is claiming a safe harbor in every country it operates in, that is of course on the presumption that you remain a platform. I mean you don't get into arbitration. You essentially make the connections between the users, right? So that probably is the first thing that he will have to address. That how you genuinely become a platform again, and that obviously needs a lot of rollback from what Twitter was doing earlier in terms of its behavior. So that practically is the first question to address. Later on, as we said, specifically on content or individual posts, for example, what is written. So again, that needs transparency of what is allowed, what is not allowed, and the transparency has to be applied in a way which is ideology neutral, or even technology neutral for that matter, in the sense of how it's being administered. Also, of course, if there are variations in country policies, etc., that's something which they have to eventually address. He cannot run away with that, or he certainly cannot apply a American standard onto other parts of the world. That's also not going to fly. So he could have a personal view on what constitutes free speech, but that may not actually be acceptable elsewhere. So I think those are the questions really to resolve in terms of the content moderation per se. But clearly, I think it will be a big change for the company as a whole. So even if there are some people from the past who are still in the company, which I'm sure they're like not everyone has left, it's also a bit of a how fast can the culture adopt, even with the remaining 2,000 people, in terms of how the platform was working earlier and how it will work going forward. Because there could be operational issues in terms of you can make a policy, but how do you actually implement it in a large organization, right? And something where information is so real time in nature. So I think that those would be the operational challenges, I would assume.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I kind of agree with you. I think the law of the land has to be supreme, right? And it cannot be decided by a particular corporation in the United States, for sure, right? But to the degree that they can be transparent, I think the algorithm as such has to be sort of, if not open sourced, at least published, right? Saying that, hey, this is how we view content and this is how our moderation works, right? And, I think we need to leverage user moderation as well. I think, back in the day, in the old internet, I mean, this used to work really well. And you could argue that at the scale at which we are right now, maybe, some of this can be gamed or whatever, but I would still feel that, some kind of intelligence on user moderation really works. And overall, I think Twitter should focus on being generally right than very specifically wrong. I think optimizing for those things makes a huge difference, and also like have a proper recourse, right? I mean, if someone is banned, there should be a transparent appeal system and so on, which I think up until now everything was operating behind like a dark curtain in some sense, right? So Amit, we've discussed the significance of Twitter as such, how much of public discourse can be shaped on Twitter, and how much of this narrative can be built, and how it can be used and misused and whatnot. When we talk about the government, right? I mean, what do you think the government's attitude towards Twitter should be? I mean, pretty much all of the government representatives, or a lot of them are using Twitter actively. What do you see the government's response to Twitter and whatever is happening right now?
Yeah, so the new IT rules that the Indian government has recently notified, I think puts greater obligation on the social media platforms, and that's a great step in the right direction. These rules will force the platforms to act against unlawful content and misinformation. Minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar has been very vocal about it in his recent interactions. And basically, I think the community guidelines for the platforms, irrespective of where they are headquartered, cannot contradict the constitutional rights or the rules in India. And if the platforms are operating here, and I think this is something that other countries like, I mean, Europe, we discussed that example, they're also enforcing. So these rules need to be very clearly implemented, and there'll be a process for these platforms to appeal as well. But the rules will also give specific guidelines about uh, how quickly or in what time frame they have to act against specific requests, whether it's moderation of content, whether it's blocking a particular account, or whatever that may be. And I think that is going to be very important. And I'm personally hopeful that these new rules are a great step in the right direction. Because see, if these platforms are not following the rules, then per the new IT rules, they will lose the platform privilege, and then they will be treated as publishers, and that uh, again exposes them to a whole different set of guidelines. So it is in their interest to be following some of these specific rules and guidelines that are being enforced.
Yeah. In fact, I mean, I'm just looking at a tweet by the minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar. He's quote tweeted Matt Taibbi's Twitter files and said the thread is about power of internet platforms and abuse of that power with no accountability. It is very obvious that safe harbors for internet intermediaries must be conditional on them following a set of rules as India has done.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think very well summarized in that sense. Yeah, and I think the data protection bill will have a lot more implications on this, right? I mean, because we define what personal data is and so on. I think that is long due, actually. I mean, for a long while, I think the IT Act was being used for some of these things. But yeah, I mean, given the way the internet has exploded over the last 10 years specifically, right? And given we're at 600 million internet users, tending towards almost a billion over the next 5 years, this is going to be really important. Ashish,
Gary, actually, I should remind that we had done a discussion on the earlier set of IT rules. That was in
yeah.
February 2021, if I remember correctly. So we had, this topic was discussed in significant detail on Bharat Varta in I think about 2 years ago.
Yeah, we'll link back to that in the description. Definitely check that out. Ashish, I briefly referenced the Twitter files, right? And Matt Taibbi. Again, Elon, in typical Elon fashion, has created such an intrigue around these Twitter files, right? And we had one thread by Matt Taibbi talking about the Hunter Biden laptop story that was kind of suppressed, and then we had Barry Weiss again talking about visibility filtering and so on, right? I mean, both of them put out threads with sources from Twitter corroborating a lot of the stuff that they're talking about. What do you make of this, Ashish?
See the thread which came out today actually from Barry Weiss. I think that has got some very interesting screenshots, right? Like what they've put out. The screenshots show that there was a lot of control on the individual accounts, which was being done by whichever teams were involved in making these decisions on how an account should behave. So, for example, in one screenshot, you can see a tab called direct messages. So does it mean that the direct messages of a user were exposed to the people in Twitter, inside Twitter? Not sure, right? Like the tab is very much visible in console, which you can see. Similarly, there are other things like hashtags, and would that mean that if a user had tweeted based on hashtag, you can actually sort it out in the console very easily? Things like that. So clearly, there are actually even more questions than what the threads have put out. But what was happening was, firstly, that there definitely was a publisher behavior here, in the sense that someone in Twitter was deciding what should be seen on the platform and who should be seen on the platform, both ways, right? And then whose replies get deboosted, or who's not being able to uh, use the whole functionality of the platform. That was a very manual decision. Also, in the first thread, it also appeared that the moderation was not happening just for large prominent names, I mean large accounts and prominent names. It was probably happening at a much lower level as well. The level of discretion was significantly higher than what one would assume. That even the worst critics of Twitter could be surprised by the type of moderation which they were doing when these things come out. And especially on the visibility filtering, again, first of all, I clearly like the name there. Like they've tried to make a virtue out of a problem
Yeah.
here by calling it visibility filtering, rather than saying that okay, we have been censored. So quite creative. Definitely, I should give the credit where due, whoever came up with the names. But these exposes clearly corroborate what we've been talking about or chatting on Twitter for the last several years, that there was an element of discretion. Would be great to see if there's an India equivalent of this, right? I'm not sure if this was US only, or did the teams have power in other centers also. In fact, if you remember, Twitter India has several times said that they did not make any decision around verification or around moderation of any kind of a decision had to go back to California. That was their standard answer for the last several years. So it would be great to see if these decisions, firstly, were happening for Indian accounts also. And if yes, where? Was it happening in India, or was it happening in the US? Because if it's the latter, meaning if the moderation was happening, but it was happening in California, it's actually a serious legal issue as well, right? And it kind of brings focus on the whole data protection aspect of what we've been discussing in terms of the emerging rules and regulations. So the Twitter files are quite damning, actually, in whichever way you look at it. And the fact that Twitter was being used as a voice of a certain type of thought process driven by certain individuals, and we don't know who was behind us individually. I think that's a very frightening kind of a scenario. And to that extent, if Musk kind of brings it back to becoming a town square without some of these, let's say, overhangs, that could be quite an achievement.
Yeah. No, just anecdotally, I think I would say a lot of policy decisions were taken in India as well, right? I mean, I think if you look at some of the recent suppression of hashtags, I think something around Delhi riots and so on, right? I mean, things were sort of suppressed, certain type of information and everything. And the kind of people that Jack Dorsey met in India, for example, right? I mean, again, these are all very anecdotal things, and we'll have to wait on the data for India specifically to come out, right? And that may never come out actually, right? I mean, in given the scheme of things, I mean, it might be priority 40 or 50, who knows, right?
Carrie, apparently Jack was not the fall guy, right? That's what Elon tweeted today.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's another ridiculous thing, right? I mean, which I noticed, which was so many of this policy high level stuff was just being done in the dark, right? I mean, Jack Dorsey had no clue about these things. So either maybe it was a conscious decision on his part to stay away from all of this, or maybe it could be a function of hey, being a CEO of two companies and being slightly hands off. We don't know which is what, right here.
So
But
I tweeted about that, right? Like we live in a world where just saying that I was not malicious but simply incompetent is actually considered a badge of honor these days.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So SBF also tweeted something like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right? Sam
No,
Bankman
that's his
Fried.
full
So
defense, right? I mean, the crypto world is
It's,
crypto world is saying all
I
of them
don't.
are saying the same thing, that we don't know what we were doing. Sorry.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, I guess I don't know if there's a. I mean, I'm not a legal expert, but I don't know if there's a term like the incompetence defense,
Yeah, yeah.
is what is being
Like
used.
insanity defense, right? So
Yeah.
yeah. But Twitter files to me was a bit of a revelation. I mean, obviously, it confirmed a lot of things that we all doubted and suspected. But the level of arbitrariness, I mean, was something that I could not have estimated myself, right? I mean, where people are discussing things on email threads, right? I mean, this is not like something like a ticket or support ticket or something of that sort. It's none of these things. I mean, people literally starting emails and saying, hey, what should we do with a particular person or a particular topic? That is just it's just crazy, right? So Amit, sometime back, I mean, there was this whole thing about, hey, we should have Indian equivalents of everything, right? I mean, whatever it is, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. Of course, Indian consumer internet has come a long way. I mean, we do have plenty of amazing platforms, Kuku FM, Stage, and so on and so forth. Plenty of these folks. Do you think there could be an Indian Twitter at some point of time? Or, I mean, do you think it's already there? Just that perhaps, I mean, we don't quite realize it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, and Ashish briefly talked about it as well, and I agree with him that, I mean, technologically, we can have a product like that, but the key issue is, I mean, I would say technology is trivial, but beyond that, even if you build the technology, getting the critical mass and getting the users, the 300 million users, that critical mass is the toughest problem. And I think in a open global community that India is in. See, India is not China. We don't have a complete firewall surrounding our country where we don't allow any of the external apps in here, right? I mean, if what China did was they blocked the outside apps and then their own apps are there. So that's clearly we are not that, and that's good. So because of that, when we talk about an Indian equivalent for these, it is not the technology space that they are fighting, but the legacy of the last 10, 15, 20 years of the user base. And to start from scratch, you can't have as is commonly a term that is commonly used in technology, a similar Me Too solution. It has to be something. So Twitter, for example, blogging was there, and there were many blogging platforms. But so another India-centric blogging platform would have been in a Me Too solution. But Twitter disrupted that by space by coming up with something completely different, a new platform altogether, a new format, right? So to answer your question, yes, we can definitely have something. We are technologically very capable of building something like this. But I think from an idea standpoint, also, we can't just create a platform that is just mimicking what's there in Twitter or in some of the other popular platforms. But we have to think of newer workflows and newer ideas that haven't been created thus far or invented thus far. And then we have a very good chance of not just capturing the Indian market, but a global market. I mean, again, look at TikTok, right? I mean, they created something that didn't exist in the US, and they were able to capture a significant market by doing some good technology innovations.
Carry
100% agree.
this is actually a very important point. See, the time that all of us have at hand to use a platform is finite, right? Now, if your interests are diverse, let's say for example you look at SaaS. Now, SaaS is a global topic in the sense that there's an excellence being achieved in different parts of the world. In your professional capacity, you may want to be learning from different individuals who are not in India. So Twitter had this very unique purpose that it was also not geographically limited. Practically from day one, you had useful people elsewhere who you can follow. So I use Koo. I've been on Koo practically since the time they launched. The challenge there is that it is a very India centric platform, and also people are currently just reposting what they post on Twitter. I did do the same actually, so I can hardly blame anyone else. But the uniqueness about Twitter is that, let's say you can discuss Bollywood and SaaS trends on the same platform. Koo can replicate the former, but not the latter. As of now, that is right. So the utility that the platform brings, and because the time is finite, you cannot say that okay, for Indian discussions I will go to Koo, but when I want to read about SaaS, I'll come back to Twitter. That's not going to happen, right? You will not, and which is why platforms like Gab or Parler or Mastodon don't take off, because people who try and quit those platforms always end up being on Twitter after 2 weeks, because they will not get the full set of their experience, their learning or reading or even venting experience on a single platform, which is what Twitter enabled.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I think an important point is to have people of all different stripes as well, right? I mean, people on those platforms you mentioned, whether it's Parler or whatever, again, like Twitter, because they get to fight with people who may not agree with them, right? It's very interesting, I mean, I've spoken to quite a few consumer internet startups here in India. Koo, for instance, recently launched in Brazil, and they've got some 1 million downloads, which is a significant number, right? And they're fast growing there. A bunch of these folks, ShareChat, etc., will internationalize for sure, right? I mean, I think the size of the domestic market in India kind of delays some of this stuff, right? I mean, look at ShareChat, for example. I mean, ShareChat is, I think, around 300 million something internet users, 300 million users at this point of time, right? Which is very, very significant. The other facet also is, I think, the India market is soon going to become a lot more viable, right? We're moving from this whole DAO market to an ARPU market, right? Some of the monetization experiments of some of these local consumer internet apps that I mentioned, whether it is Kuku FM, Stage, etc., they seem to be showing a lot of promise. So I think that, maybe Indians would build for Indians for a very specific use case, right? For instance, Kuku curates all audio content, right? And people pay for stuff, right? I mean, people pay for, to listen to grandmother tales, they pay for self-help and so on and so forth, right? So, yeah, I mean, I agree with Amit on this front. I don't know if like a proper Me Too of Twitter will come up anytime in India, right? Ashish and Amit, what are some of the things that you wish Twitter would do, right? I mean, we're on December 9th, 2022. What do you expect over the next, 6 months to a year? I mean, if you were to sort of make a product roadmap for Elon and suggest maybe a few business things as well, right? I mean, initiatives and so on. We'll start with you, Ashish, and Amit, you can add.
I will say three things, Carrie. Firstly, it should start doing less. I mean, Twitter was doing far too much, and that is coming out in the Twitter threads. So as long as it scales down on its own work, that could be a great achievement and probably make the platform more stable. Secondly, a very tactical thing, like the app usability has to really be looked into. Speed of loading, type of, you could be looking at a long thread and the screen just refreshes on its own. So not to treat Android users as second class or third class, which is how Twitter has operated all along, which Elon Musk, by the way, himself confirmed a few weeks ago. So I would say that would be like probably a good thing to do, because ultimately the volume outside of the US comes on Android, not on web or on iOS. And the third thing would be that Twitter should evolve as a great search engine, right? Today, let's say you are not a user, or let's say you're not logged in onto web, and you go to Twitter and you search for something, you can't actually scroll much, because the platform will just take you to a landing page where it will ask you to log in or create an ID. In reality, a lot of good information is already on Twitter, just that it is extremely difficult to find it, even in terms of long threads or people's opinion on things, or knowledge about books. A whole bunch of things are available on Twitter in significantly better shape than, say, Google. But how do you make a credible search engine? I think that could really change the value of Twitter, because it could be then very, very specific in nature, right? This would not be Google type search, which is where accuracy is not that important. It is more about speed and showing up the more popular type stuff. While Twitter actually has fairly rich content, very pointed content, but it's not visible very easily. So I would say those will be my three wish lists.
Yeah, great points.
So I think, Gary, I agree with. I mean, I would have those same 3 points, at least those same three as my top categories. The first is just get the moderation and the whole policies and processes around content and managing users into a very transparent framework that we've been talking about. I think that is definitely something that Musk is awarding top priority. The second is just basic technical or technology hygiene issues. Too many basic issues in an app that has 300 million plus users and has been around for 15 plus years, right? And again, it goes back to the point that I made some time back that even from a technology skill standpoint, Twitter has not been as great as Google or Facebook as some of the other Silicon Valley companies. I think that I'm quite optimistic that with Musk's focus on software development and architecture, he will address that. And there are Android issues, there are scrolling issues, there are some new feature request issues that have been around for a long time. And yes, I'm a big fan of search. Third point Ashish mentioned. In fact, I myself use search very extensively to scroll through my 300,000 plus tweets to find specific information that I'm looking for, because I have a vague idea that I have written something about it 5 years back or 10 years back or 12 years back. And I think there's a gold mine in this billions and billions of tweets that Twitter has that can be utilized so much more effectively. Google does a better job for some of the current tweets, which it caches, of searching Twitter than Twitter search, right? And I think that can be improved significantly, and the value of this app can grow many times more just by providing a smart, intelligent search. And I mean, it's not a new problem. I think they just need to look at or maybe hire some of the Google search search folks and get it done.
Yeah, no, for sure. And one of the better things that I liked about Elon taking over was I think he thought like a CTO, right? I mean, one of the first things that he started fixing was this all latency issues and so on, which is pretty amazing actually. As you rightly mentioned, Amit, I think for an app which has 300, 400 million users, right? It definitely, I mean, on the tech side, we could definitely catch up. On the product side, even, right? I mean, look at Twitter direct messaging, for example, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it seems ancient, right?
I mean, they were ahead. They were ahead of, in some sense, you can say that they were ahead of WhatsApp and Signal and Telegram, and they were completely. I mean, they could have taken that space, but they completely considered that space.
So, from my perspective, I think I would say, I mean, plenty of things got covered by Ashish and Amit, but three things from my perspective. I think one is monetization for users, right? Clearly, users are providing a lot of value, right? And there should be some way of sort of monetizing this. And I know
Good
that,
point.
there is, Twitter has sort of tried this earlier. But I think they need to sort of productize this. They need to go full steam on this and incentivize people to create good, valuable content on the platform, right? I mean, so for sure, monetization is one thing. Second thing is, how about giving organizations or users the capacity to build newsrooms, right? You think of Spaces, for example. Spaces is a great idea, right? But if I were to wear my product hat, I think it's maybe like the version 1.0 of a killer product by itself, right? I think so. The ability to sort of do newsrooms, ability to do public conferences, and so on, right? I mean, because imagine what we said about Twitter, right? I mean, it's got great journalistic value, right? So why not extend those capabilities in the virtual setup itself, right? So that's the second thing. Third thing, something that Amit also brought up is the whole data and analytics angle, right? I think Twitter advertising for brands is very nascent at this point of time. I think just given the amount of insights that you can glean from Twitter, definitely I think there could be an analytics product position for brands and so on, which could be way more valuable, right? And think of it as a sort of a SaaS product or platform in itself. So these are two or three things that I would have in my roadmap per se. Ashish and Amit, before we wind down the discussion, what are some of the accounts that you would say are your favorite accounts that people should follow? I mean, of course, we're talking about non-affiliated people, right? We're talking about people who are not particularly your friends as such. We'll start with you, Ashish, and Amit, you can add.
This is a very difficult one, Carrie, actually, because see, as I've been saying, the real value of Twitter is that it is a multivariate platform, right? I may be following someone for, let's say, trade law, which is what I do these days in a big way, but that like that person's opinion on some other topic could be completely irrelevant. In that sense, it is very difficult to really kind of zoom in on one or two people. But actually, I would say that my real value from Twitter has not been to follow individuals. I mean, it's a value in itself, but the real value has actually been the friendships that I've made out of Twitter, right? At least there are 10, 15 people that I would not have met if Twitter did not existed. And of course, we like two are on this call, of course, but but in general, I think that's been the real value add that to my personal life, that I now know at least 30, 40 people and 10, 15 of them very closely, where I can reach out for personal, professional help, all kinds of queries for debates and discussions. And I think that's really been extremely enriching. I do not see how else we would have connected if Twitter did not exist yet, right? Because I mean, our paths otherwise would have been very, very different. For Amit and I, despite being in the same city, we would have not
Yeah.
connected, because a lot of social events have been now been driven by Twitter, right? So otherwise, I wouldn't have gone to events where Amit was going, or vice versa.
Yeah. No,
True.
absolutely.
True.
Hey, small tangent here. What do you guys think about anon accounts? I mean, do you think that anonymous accounts are something that should continue, or do you think, I mean, people should be verified and so on and so forth?
I would say that there's a value in having non-accounts, in the sense that people have, like, there are reasons, there could be genuine reasons for people for being anonymous, especially,
Yeah.
for example, if you're in a conflict zone and you are
Corporate.
something. So it is very difficult to have a one shoe fits all approach here. What would again be useful is that if a non-account is constantly engaging only in some violation of Twitter terms of service, then the action should be much more prompt, right? And I think that's and of course, as we have discussed, the terms of service has to be much more defined in that sense. But I don't think a complete ban on anonymous accounts is possible, and it's not even desirable in my view.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree. I think the terms of service should apply for all content, right? Irrespective of whether someone is
Correct.
presenting themselves as real and authentic, or someone is sort of tweeting from an unknown handle. Uh, uh, Amit, what do you think about the new blue tick policies? By the way, the $8 a month,
I think
the
that
$8 a
policy,
month policies.
I think that policy is still not defined, I think, completely. I think that's one area where I think Elon Musk got a little ahead of himself. And soon he realized, see, one good thing about him is he's very quick to, I mean, he has that classic engineering mindset of putting something out there, and if it breaks, then quickly re-architect it or change it or fix
He's
it, right? And I think
iterating
he's in
real
that.
time.
Yeah, and I think he's in that mode right now, that he had some quick ideas, and I think clearly those ideas are not going to work as they are. I think fundamentally, I mean, this is something that I have tweeted earlier as well, and this is true for LinkedIn, for Google, for Twitter, everything. I think these websites or apps, whatever you call them, are so valuable to most of us, and the amount of time we spend on it for work, for other personal use, for our interests, for networking, is so high that I think I'm a believer that fundamentally we should be paying for it, a small amount, but we should be paying for it, because I mean, ultimately, if you don't pay for it, then advertising remains the only model, right? And I would rather, I mean, I don't think they can eliminate advertising completely, but I would pay a small amount to all these websites, and I do. For example, for LinkedIn, I do. They already have this premium account feature, right? And get greater user control and lesser ads than I would other ways. So, as a philosophy or as a policy, I think that's fundamentally a good idea. Going back to your earlier question about who to follow, I think fundamentally the great thing about Twitter has been finding new people that you didn't know, and instead of giving a templatized list for your listeners or viewers, I think you should go in a self-discovery mode on Twitter and find out for yourself who are the interesting accounts to follow in your areas of interest. And I think following some people and then finding who they interact with, who they tweet, this whole organic way of discovering people is very interesting. There's another very good feature on Twitter that very few people know and very few people use, and has been around for a long time, and which I use quite a bit now for the last 2 3 years, and that's the feature of topics. So you can actually follow topics. So if I'm interested in aerospace, if I'm interested in automotive, right, or if I'm interested in a specific kind of history, I can follow that topic. And on a separate thread, I'll get people that I don't follow but who are tweeting good content on those topics. And then obviously, if I like them, I'll follow them directly. That is also a good way to discover some of these new IDs to follow. Having said that, though, I'll give you three names that I are among my favorite. I would think that, I mean, it's an obvious one, but people should be following Elon Musk right now. I would have said that even before he bought Twitter for his various areas of interest and sometimes this crazy humor as well. But now, of course, he's setting the direction for this product and driving it. So all the more reason to be because there are literally every day 5-10 articles being written on what he tweeted, and most of these media web sites take one tweet and convert it to a long article. I mean, ignore all those articles and just read a tweet. You would. On my other areas of interest on science and technology, I would strongly recommend this handle called Rainmaker1973. I think many of you, I mean, he's just an amazing guy. I haven't met him. He's based in Italy. I think he's an academic, but the kind of content he's able to curate and find in the general science and technology field is just phenomenal. And I would definitely recommend. There are many more, but let me just stop at these two right now.
Yeah.
If I do three, I'll have to do 4, 5, and 6. So let me just stay with these two right now.
Yeah, I think Elon is the most entertaining handle at this point of time, no question about it. And few others, especially I like what Amit said, right? Which is that maybe you know someone or someone is famous, then you go see the kind of people that they interact with. Sometimes, I mean, they turn out to be interesting as well, right? And you find a lot more people. So for me, my three would be AJA Cortez, right? His name is Alexander Cortez. He tweets under AJA_Cortez, Cortes. Very, very sane fitness and training advice. And of course, Nassim Taleb, NN Taleb. He doesn't tweet as much these days, but yeah, I mean, very entertaining as well. And for anything on startups and SaaS, I really love Jason Lemkin, right? Who's at Jason LK, JASON on Twitter. These are some amazing accounts to follow. Wow. So we've come to the end of this discussion. I mean, we could go on for another hour perhaps, right? I mean, there's just so much to talk about. But yeah, I mean, this was a fun chat, Aashish and Amit, and I'm so glad I met you guys through Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharat Varta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharat Varta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.